Well, welcome back to episode 3. We're so glad you joined us again. Today, we want to talk about the sales process and what the sales process is. And so what we want to talk today about is what happens after the lead comes in, right? You've got to have people to talk to. And our next episode is actually going to be how do you fill your funnel and how do you get leads, right? You got to take care of your house, but we didn't have time to do that in episode 2. So our next episode is going to be around on how do you fill the funnel. But what we want to talk about today is something that we're super passionate about, and that is really the sales process. And I'll run through it real quick. It's a sales process that Brett and I have been using since really July of 1997, and we'll get into that. And there's really 4 steps, maybe 5, and we'll dig deep into each of these. And each of these really, Brent, could be its own topic, right? You could talk about setting the appointment, and I know you've got some things that you want to share is how do you get that appointment set, and that kind of goes into the lead flow thing. But really the 4 steps are in the sales process that we've learned and studied over the course of, boy, it's been close to 30 years, is you've got to set the appointment, and then you have to have a discovery meeting, or what we call a needs analysis meeting. And then you've got to have where you present your solution. So you call it the presentation stage. And then you close the deal. And if you don't close it, then it goes into what we call a nurture phase. So we'll dig into each topic a little bit more. So number 1 is really setting the appointment. But Brent, why don't you talk a little about, I don't want to have you give away everything in episode 4, but why don't you talk about a few different channels? How do you get people to talk to? And
Yeah,
how
it's
do
a
you
great
set that
question.
appointment?
You have to have, we're talking about setting an appointment, but without those leads to set those appointments, there's a lot of different ways you can do that. Networking is one that we've always done, historically has been very successful. Building joint venture partnerships with other industries or like-minded individuals that you can exchange leads back and forth with has been very, very successful for us. And then obviously a bunch of different marketing strategies that help drive leads. And we're doing a lot of those things today for ourselves, including email marketing, running ads, running podcasts, webinars, things like that. But you have to have a consistent lead flow in order to have enough people to call to set that appointment.
Yeah, and we talk about being omnipresent, right? You really, if you just use one channel, we sell, and we're a marketing agency at JBX Strategies, but as you mentioned, there's different channels. There's email. There's, remember old school cold calling where you picked up the phone and you even knocked on doors. So we're a big advocate, and we're going to dig really deep into this next time. Is how do you fill your funnel? And it really boils around to is being omnipresent. That's kind of the word of the week that we've been using at JBX. It's pretty funny, and that's being everywhere. And so, but yeah, you're right. So step 1 is you've got to set that appointment, right? And that could be from a form fill. It could be from an email. They want to talk to you, or someone calls in. And just to clarify, we're a marketing company at JBX, and we cater to the home service business. So we're going to kind of lean that way a little bit. But this sales process could be for B2B. It could be for any industry, right? So take that in context with what we're talking about. So really, when you set the appointment, you've got to have somebody to talk to. And in our opinion, if it's not on the calendar, it doesn't constitute an appointment. So that could be from if you're an HVAC company and it's a hot day here in Minnesota and your air conditioning's not working, they fill out a form fill. You've got to call that client back, or you take that incoming call, and you've got to say, yep, I can come out to your home and meet with you this Thursday. And if it's an emergency, you can maybe do it that day. But you've got to have a set time on the schedule. And I think the first one is setting the appointment is pretty basic, right? You have to have it on the schedule, and you have to have that second meeting set, which is that discovery meeting. Anything to add to that?
No, I think there's 2 things. There's inbound leads, right, where you're picking up the phone and answering the phone and setting the appointment. And I agree, in the home service space, you get a lot of that. People are calling, looking for service work or looking to purchase your services. The most important thing on that first call, whether it's inbound or when you're calling outbound, is to get a calendar commitment and to set the appointment. Your job is not to sell the customer on that first call. You want to get in front of them so you can figure out really what their problem is and identify what that is, and then hopefully bring back the solution to them in the presentation stage.
Yeah, perfect. Well, let's move on. The next step is what we call the discovery phase or the needs analysis phase. And that's really where you dig in and have a bunch of questions. And we've got some questions here for you that we'll share. Prior to that, one of the things that I think that's always helped us out, Brent, is what we call pre-call preparation, right? So no matter what industry in, if um, Bob Smith calls me and wants us to come out and take a look, if I'm an HVAC dealer or a landscape owner, and he wants us to come out and do a site survey of his yard, it doesn't hurt to do some pre-call preparation. So you can go to Facebook, you can go to Instagram, you can find these people, you can find out what they like, what they don't like. If they're posting about their kids in baseball, you can talk about baseball. Brent, you played baseball, so that would be a great way to build rapport. I like to hunt and fish, so I'm always looking if people like to hunt and fish. We can talk about tractors and cool things like that. So spend a few minutes with pre-call preparation, right? If you're an HVAC company, even if you're B2B, right? And you've got a meeting with, Frank Jones, you know, go to his LinkedIn profile and see if you've got some common connections. I can tell you right now, your competition isn't spending any time at all on doing pre-call preparation. And what it does, it helps build trust and authenticity, and it shows that you're prepared, right? So when you go out there for that discovery meeting or needs analysis meeting, in the home service business, it could be a site survey, right? If you're a contractor and they've got a bad deck or they're looking to build a new deck and they want to go out there and talk ideas. So, Brent, why don't you talk a little bit about step two? So, I would say there's 4 steps in the sales process, but with the pre-call preparation, excuse me, it could be step one and or I'm sorry, set the appointment could be step one, and then 1A is do your pre-call preparation. Step two would be the discovery meeting.
Yeah, I think, we talk about the 4 steps. I think this step is by far the most important step. Obviously, step 1 is important. You got to have the leads, you got to set the appointments. But the discovery process is where you build trust with the prospect. And you're either going to gain trust or lose it. And if you can't build trust with that particular prospect, you have no chance of winning their business, right? And then that leads me to, you better be selling a product that you believe in 100%. You got to have 100% confidence in your product in order to build trust with a prospect, right? If you're selling a product you don't believe in, customers will see through that and they will not basically take you to the next step. So I 100% think that this is where the deal is made or not made, right? Um, and
Yeah, and I always like the discovery meeting too, because if you did some pre-call preparation, when you go out there and you're prepared, you're right. It separates you from your competition. And one thing I'll point out is you really want to understand the problem that they face. But to your point, Brent, if you don't have confidence, and sales is a lot of confidence, and if you don't have confidence in your product and believe in it, you're not going to do very well, right? But I really think you've got to understand the customer's problems. And here's, and I pulled together some questions. And again, these are more tailored for, kind of the home service industry. But, hey, tell me a little bit about your project. What are they trying to accomplish? If they've got issues, how long has this been a concern? Have you had a lot of trouble with your air conditioning? Um, have you talked? You want to know if there's competition in there. Have you talked to anybody else? Who are you looking at, right? You want to understand that. And really the big takeaway that we've learned is you really want to try to find out what it's going to take for them to become a customer. You want to find out if they've got a budget for the project. And I think if you understand what it's going to take for them to become a customer, and there's nothing wrong with asking them. It's like, how are you going to select a vendor? Is it based on price? Is it based on value? Is it based on quality? What are you looking for? How are you going to make the decision? And especially if it's a large purchase like landscaping, right? Where you maybe talk to the husband and wife, You wanna know that, both of them are the decision maker, or are there any other decision makers? Maybe and we've heard this happen, right? Where you've got, young kids that own a house, but their mom and dad are funding a project, whether it be a landscape project, right? So you've got multiple decision makers. So you kinda wanna understand the buying process. But it's really you wanna find out, the pain points, and this is for B2B, this is for any type of sales, but you wanna find out, um what's not working in for them, and how can you solve the problem? And then, what do you have any concerns about your current situation, right? Well, if your HVAC's not working, it's like I got to have it fixed. I need to have it working, right? Versus like a landscape company if they're going to interview three or four people. But I agree. And I really liked your comment, Brent, and we've seen it before. But you've got to believe in your product, and if you don't believe in your product, you're just not going to last long in that position.
Yeah, there's a thing called the 80-20 rule, and that applies to a bunch of different things, but I think we can take that into the discovery sales process where you spend 80% of the time focusing on the client, and I would even take that to 90%
Yeah.
and 10% time talking about yourself, right? And I think the more you do that, the better you're going to build trust. And I think about just social situations where you're introduced to a new person and they spend all their time talking about themselves and never ask anything about you, right? That's not a person that you want to hang out with ever again, right? So I kind of take that into the sales discovery process, and it truly is all about the prospect, and it's not about you, right? So don't be arrogant. They don't want to listen to your ramble and talk about yourself. They want you to solve a problem, right? And their
Yeah.
buying decision is going to be based on emotion, right? And that emotional connection you're going to make with them is about asking questions about them and what their problem is and getting to understand them as people.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because it triggered a memory. Because remember, we would call it your house and their house, right? And we would always set the agenda, and we still do today, right? When in our sales process, you set the agenda. It's like, "Hey, Mr. Customer, what I'd like to do today is spend just a few minutes talking about us, and then most of this meeting is gonna be talking about you and those problems that we can solve, and I'd like to ask you a bunch of questions. How does that sound?" Ask them that, "How does that sound?" You get them agreeing with you and shaking their head, and then they're agreeing with you, then you've got buy-in, right? So, "Hey, Brent, what I'd like to do, I really appreciate the time. I'm glad you let me come over today. I'm excited to walk around your property and see what we can do from a landscaping standpoint. What I'd like to do is, dig in a little bit to what you're trying to accomplish. I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time talking about myself, but I will tell you who we are and what we've done in the past. Does that sound okay?" And they're like, "Yeah." And a lot of people are doing that because you wanna know and really, you wanna walk away from the discovery meeting knowing what it's gonna take to get them to be a client, and I think that goes for any type of sales. It could be B2B, it could be B2C, it doesn't matter, but I think you really wanna understand what it's gonna take for them to become a client, but I think what's the old adage, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, you wanna listen listen more. I'm probably botching
For
that
sure.
analogy, but you really just wanna listen and then, take copious notes. Write down everything they say, and you wanna have and there's nothing wrong with if you've got a clipboard, right? A lot of people, business owner and salespeople, they're gonna go on site and have a clipboard. Take a few seconds and have some discovery questions written out. And again, if you've done your research and you know that they like hockey or sports or whatever they're posting on social media, you can sprinkle that in and build rapport. Not a lot of people are doing that. So I think we've covered anything else on step two, which is that discovery meeting.
No, I think the only thing I'll add to this is, this is a time where you mutually decide whether it makes sense to move forward to the next step, right? And maybe you make that decision in this meeting, or maybe you make it after you leave that meeting. But we talked about ideal customer profile, and if you've got a client that says, "Yeah, I want to do this project, got a huge landscape retaining wall I want built, but I'm buying the cheapest. Whoever gives me the lowest price, that's who I'm going with." You know your company. If you are not the cheapest provider every single time, I don't know that it's worth putting in the effort to put that quote together to go back and see them again, knowing you're going to lose the deal. right? Focus
Yeah.
on something else, or truly find out, is that really who they're going to buy from? Do they really mean that, right? So don't just accept that as the first answer. Dig in a little bit more and figure it out. But don't waste your time presenting to people that aren't the right fit for you from a customer profile standpoint, and then also personality standpoint as well, right? Um, your business reputation is on the line every single time you're dealing, and a lot of these homeowners can sometimes be challenging. You got to make decisions up front, knowing if you're dealing with a difficult person, not to engage into a business situation with them.
And it's okay to say no, right? If
Yep.
you know, like you said, if you know your ICP or what we like to call your avatar, and they don't fit that avatar, it's okay to say, "Hey, you know what? I don't think we're a good fit, and here's why." And you'll be surprised. Maybe they'll say, "Hey, you know what? Actually, I think we are a good fit, and here's why." And then you do end up bringing them on, because if you say, "Hey, you're not a good fit because we like high quality, we're not going to be the cheapest," and it sounds like you're looking for the cheapest. You know, we've had clients and prospects before say, "Actually, I really do want to work with you guys. I'm willing to do what you ask of us." So, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's super important. All right, well, we'll move on. We'll move on to step 3, and this is my favorite part, right? When you go back to the office and you've had your discovery meeting or needs analysis meeting, and that's where you say, okay, hey, you know what? They fit our avatar. We're going to put a proposal together. And you spend a lot of time putting that proposal together. And most home service businesses, here's where I think they make the mistake is then when they get the proposal done, they just email it. They email the estimate or they email the proposal or they email the scope of work, and then you get ghosted. And one thing that we learned, and this is really important, one thing that we learned is when you give away that proposal and you send it over, you lose all control. And we're never big advocates for our listeners out there. We're not advocates of people just losing control of the sales process, because then you give them everything that you've done and you spend a lot of work. You spend a lot of time and effort to put that proposal together. And again, I'm talking in generalities, right? Sometimes, depending on the business, you can put a quote together in, 3 or 4 minutes and it doesn't take long. But if you're doing a $50,000, $80,000 landscaping bid, you're putting a lot of time into it because you want it to be accurate. You just don't want to give that thing away. So Brent and I are big advocates of setting up the presentation call. And it can be if you're in the same market, do it in person. It gives you a chance to build up more trust. At a minimum, set up a Google Meets or Zoom call. Every age demographic knows how to use Zoom today. Maybe not Microsoft Teams. That's a little bit more complex, but at a minimum, call the client back, and if they don't want to do Zoom and they don't want to meet in person, at least jump on a phone call. Do not, under any circumstances, just email that over. Now, again, every once in a while, if you've got a good relationship, hey, I'm going to send the proposal, take a look at it, let me know if you have any questions. But the point is you spend a lot of time and a lot of effort. You own that document. Present in person if you can. Brent, anything to add to that on the presentation
I agree
stage?
100% with that, and we try to do that all the time. But I also agree there are a lot of different variables when you're dealing with home service, when they're talking about a quick repair of something, or they have an emergency and they know they need it replaced tomorrow, and they tell you they're going to buy from you, right? There's certain situations where you're not going to present the solution. You're going to get them the number as fast as you can because you've already won the deal. But for the most part, in person or Zoom or Teams or whatever you can use to get in front of them, for sure.
Yeah, and I'd like to expand on this a little bit. If we've got any B2B listeners, I'll just cover this real quick because it is a little bit different when you're in the home services business to consumer versus B2B. In the B2B world, and that's where we came from, and we spent 25, 30 years in that world in the sales side of things, is if you remember that discovery or needs analysis phase, is we always wanted to find out what it was going to take for them to become a customer. And really, back in the day, it would literally be anything. So you tell us if you want, free pizza for a month. I got a deal once because the guy's like, "Hey, would you buy pizza every month for once a month for a year?" And I ran the numbers and I actually went back to him and I'm like, "You know what? You said if I could do X, Y, and Z, you'd come on board, and I can do X, Y, and Z. Do you still want to come on board?" And that's where, if you don't mind, Brent, I'll talk real briefly about the green light, yellow light, red light. If you go back and present, you want to find out, again, like I said, what it's going to take for them to become a customer. If you go back there and say, "Hey, Bob, you told me if I could get you free pizza for a week, a free Lamborghini, I could cut your costs 30%, you would come on board. Is that still accurate?" And if they said yes, then you presented. You didn't have a yellow light, you got the green light, and you moved and you proceeded, right? Without caution. They said you could do X, Y, and Z. They'd come on board. You ask them that. And if they still say, "Yes, I'm coming on board," then you present your solution. If they say, "Hey, I got to talk it over with my wife," or they have an objection, you don't present, you stop. You got that red light, you stop. And then you say, "Okay, let's step back a little bit. I'm not going to share the proposal. What's changed?" Because you really don't want to give them the proposal and everything that you put into that, especially B&B. Boy, there's times if it's a large deal and you're spending, 30, 40 hours putting together a proposal, you want to make sure that, you're going to get the deal. So anything to add to that? That was just kind of some old school B2B stuff that I remember. But, proceed with caution, because once you give away your proposal, you don't have any leverage.
No, and I think statistically, if you look at this and your current close ratio right now is at 25%. I promise all listeners, if you're just emailing quotes and your close percentage is 25%, if you decide to actually start meeting with people, either face to face or scheduling a phone call or Zoom meeting, your sales close percentage will go up 5 to 10+%. And if you do the math on that, figure out what additional income that is for you. Yes, it's going to take extra time, but the prospects are there. And if you're doing that, again, what Jonathan talks about this all the time, nobody else is. Everybody else is just emailing a quote. Be different, stand out, right? And invest the time and energy to truly care about the customer and build that trust. And that presenting solutions step, you can build trust even more if you get on the phone with them. And again, your competition isn't doing it.
Yeah. And again, a lot of times, and you can have, I don't necessarily want to step back, but you could go to present and things have changed. "Hey, we decided that we wanted to add that pool now," and you've got to rework the numbers and change the proposal around. So there may be some things that you have to change in that proposal. But if you follow this process, you will close more deals. And it just shows that you're a pro. And I think if you follow the sales process, um, you're going to absolutely increase your revenue. All right. Anything else on that presentation phase?
Now let's move on to number 4.
All right. And this one we can cover pretty fast, So if you present and they come on board, you've got a closed deal, and then they go into your process, right? You maybe have a kickoff call and you get the customer on board. You gather any of the necessary information. You get them an invoice, things like that, right? So it's pretty simple. Once you close the deal, they come on board. If they don't close, and we've had lots of conversations on this, why don't you talk about follow up and how many times do you follow up with them?
Yeah, that's a big one, especially in bigger ticket items. We find a lot of home service businesses doing the quotes, um, not getting the deal, and then not nurturing. The average salesperson, I think, reaches out 1.3 times after they've presented, if they get ignored. And quite honestly, it can take 6 months, 12 months, up to 2 years for some of these larger deals to close. You have to have a system in place from a nurturing standpoint, and it doesn't have to be all phone calls or all texts. There's plenty of technology out there that allows you to follow up automated and stay in front of people. And we just had a recent win here. We had a client, a prospect, come back to us after
Yeah.
about a year and a half, and we had them on an automated outreach system, and Jonathan, managed that process, and they came back to us and said they were ready to buy. Had we not followed up with them, 10, 15 times, we never would have gotten that business.
No, and this goes back to the pre-call preparation piece, right? So a lot of times we'll friend our prospects on Facebook, and then they're seeing our content, right? So you throw them into Nurture, and we use Go High Level, but you can use HubSpot or Go High Level, whatever your CRM. A lot of them have some email capabilities, but so he was seeing our newsletters once a month, and then we were inviting him to to our webinar. But then he was seeing all my content on Facebook because he was a Facebook user, and I'm posting stuff. And just so you guys know what I like to do, and everyone's different, but I like to build my brand. And I changed this about 18 months ago, and this is off the sales process, but it is, you need to build your own brand. So on Facebook and social media, I'm doing 2 or 3 posts, call it up for every 4 posts. I'm doing one about family, friends. I'm doing one on hunting and fishing and outdoor stuff. I'm doing one on family stuff. And then I'll sprinkle in some work stuff, right? So they get to see me talking about JBX and marketing and the Built to Win podcast. So over the course of a year or 18 months, he's like, "Hey, I'm seeing all your stuff. You guys are everywhere. I'm ready to come on board." And we basically had, here's what's cool too about the sales process. You can do a one-call close. You can actually set the meeting. You can have a discovery meeting, and you can close the deal or present and close the deal all in one call. So it was basically, I think we had 2 meetings with him, but it was pretty much a one-call close. He called and said, "Hey, I've been following you. I've been watching your stuff. I'm ready to come on board. Is the price still X, Y, and Z?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we can still do it for that. Let's get going." He's like, "Perfect. Let's just jump on a call, confirm some of the details, and let's get going." So,
Yeah, and I think that leads me to, closing the deal. And we always hear about, the hard close and things like that. The reality is everybody has their art in how they do this. I'm not a believer in the hard close. Doesn't mean you can't be. But I don't think you should have to ask for their business. If you've done everything right up to this point, the close is just part of the discovery or the presentation, and they just say they're ready to go. You don't have to ask them. Now, some people need a little bit of nudge because they're not quite ready. I mean, go ahead and give that to them. But for the most part, if this process goes as planned, the close is just part of that presentation, and they just say, "Yeah, let's get started." Right? You don't have to ask for anything. You don't have to do the hard close. You don't have to do the state fair special, right? Which we have up in here in Minnesota all the time. They come into your house and it's June and they're already offering the state fair special from September, right? Drives me nuts, right? But I'm not a believer in that. I never buy from anybody that does that to me, nor do we ever do that to anybody. But that's just my opinion.
well, fantastic. I think we could probably end it right there. Another great episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you guys did enjoy this episode, don't be afraid to hit that like button. We'd love to have you subscribe, and we're really enjoying this, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, and we'll talk soon.